Yeah, this really came out of meeting a lot of great lay people. Honestly, working in so many different districts or networks, 12 churches on a Saturday, all of them around round tables, just meeting a lot of really good folks who've been in their churches for a really long time and longing for days of greater effectiveness. And you know these people, you encounter them. If you're in a church setting, you've got them in your church. They're just wonderful folks who want what Jesus wants, and yet their churches have maybe for many years struggled to be effective or struggled to really fulfill their full potential. And versus the people that we sometimes think of when we talk about leading change, the deacon that if you watch him close enough, his head will spin all the way around, or just the evil, wicked individuals that stand in the way, or the church matriarch that if you're not her son, you're not going to be her pastor, or whatever, all those kind of things. Which some of those stories are true, but my suspicion is they might be a tad embellished and maybe more maybe the assumption or the implication is they're more widespread than they really are. That I started this book with the imagery. I'm from Kansas originally, and so I started with the Dorothy and Toto imagery a little bit by just simply saying I peeked behind the curtain. I really looked at these church powerhouse people and saw who they really are. And like Oz in that famous movie, um, they're not nearly as intimidating when you really see them for who they are. And so that was kind of the tone with which I wanted to write. And so I wanted to write a book on change, leading change. Not that there weren't already enough of these. There are tons of books on change, as you very well know. But I wanted to write it from the vantage point of the people who we are trying to change, rather than from the leader trying to get the change done. What does that leader really need to know about the people who are on the receiving end of his efforts or her efforts? And so that's why the title's subject to change, because that's what these people are. They are being subjected to change efforts. And, if you're pastor number 13, like I was in Wichita, Kansas, probably they've been subjected to change efforts by multiple leaders along the way. And so, what is it that they really wish pastor would know before leading them into change? And I hear these kind of statements from pastors. You hear them too. You wouldn't believe this one guy I got to deal with. It talks about his frustrations with other minister friends. Can't get anything done because of those couple of ladies. Have a great plan to grow an amazing church. Truly impact the town, but they, the people being the perceived hindrance. And again, not discounting the fact that there are true stories of people being a hindrance, but the fact of the matter is there is a path, and effective leadership, good emotional intelligence, and just a I guess thinking the best about people can open the door to in that change journey maybe a little wider than other attitudes might open it. Churches don't change because the people won't let them change. Well, I prefer to say we just haven't found the right path forward in many cases. And so that was kind of the motivation behind the book. Like I said, I peeked behind the curtain. I saw who many of these leaders really are, and their heart for Christ, their desire for the Great Commission. They want good things. And so, as I begin to walk through this, what I discovered very much in meeting so many folks is that the portrait of the control freak deacon, or that controlling church matriarch, are a bit overstated. Many of these congregation dominators, and I've met several of them, uh, many of them have simply along the way found it necessary to step in. Maybe a pastor left them in the lurch, maybe left them with a lot of difficulty they had to overcome. They've gone through something as a church, and leaders within the church have had to step in to certain assignments on a temporary basis, at least, or have had to step into roles or take control that, in truth, they were really never equipped for or really designed, to step into that. And so then what happens? New leader comes in, and there's a cautiousness now in giving that same authority that they once gave to their former pastor, who kind of left them, in an awkward moment. It's is there a little bit more difficulty in extending the trust necessary to fully step back into their rightful spots. And so, some of that's there. Some we have some controlling deacons in Assemblies of God churches in America that are controlling because we needed them to be. They had to be in the moment. And it turned them into something, or maybe created something for them that caused there to be a little bit less trust for them to give it back. So these are not bad people, is my point. They're not bad people. So how do you lead them well? And so what I did is I divided this book. If you're not familiar with the book, I've divided the book really into actually 9 different categories of things people want them to know. One of these categories I introduced in the introduction, and then the category I kind of just there are 37 of these things people want people to know, want their pastor to know. And so I identified 37. I thought, I really should go for 40, but when I got to 37 and I realized that I had already identified everything that I really thought was important, I thought, why add three that don't make any sense? And so I kept it at the 37. Nice, good prime number there. But kind of organized them according to elements of passion. What's going on? How are the passions different between people and pastor? Patience. Sometimes we have our difficulties related to speed. The past. I'll kind of break some of these down here in just a moment. Certainly, the nature of the people themselves are different in every church. The path, the road forward, the pattern. Whether or not we're seeing in our pastor the things our pastor wants to see in us. Again, the speed or the pace with which change comes, and really then how do we build the sense of partnership? And so what I thought I'd do is just throw up some slides here listing some of these, and I would highlight one of these on each slide, just to talk about it for just a moment, so you could kind of get a sense of really what we tried to accomplish in the book and the kind of things that are there. What we've seen happen since I wrote the book. There have been a number of districts where the superintendent decided to buy a copy for every pastor and send it out, or every district affiliated pastor, or whatever. My hope is what they find in the book is just some wisdom for leading change well, some wisdom for building healthy relationships between pastor and people. Just some things pastor needs to know. Some of us have been around this work long enough to remember ideas that were put out there by various authors or well-known lead pastors that basically, hey, change everything right away. The people will never love you more than the day they elected you, and so use that and go after, kind of like Trump's going to hit the ground running here in his first 100 days. Every president is always trying to get their agenda in place as fast as possible. That style of leadership, as most of us have enough bruises to know, doesn't really work in the pastor. Very few pastors have the kind of leadership capacity to pull that off. I'm talking less than 10%. The truth is, we all know that a pastor's got to be there a while. A pastor's got to build relationships. We talk about Maxwell's 5 levels of influence. We understand, that you just don't charge in the front door on day one, guns blazing and leading change. And so some wisdom along the way that I hope pastors can benefit from. So here's what this looks like. What are some of the things that they want us to know? I'll just do the colored highlight ones, talk about them for a minute. You can see some of the others that are there. I won't give you all 37 here because then you won't buy the book, and so that would kind of defeat the point. But no, I'm going to pop up a lot of them here, but just the ones I really wanted to share with you. One of the things I have seen a lot of, and I kind of talk about this in a more protracted way in the book, is that when we get a new pastor in a church, many times what pastor and people are looking for from day one is very different. The pastor is excited about the possibilities. I know when I went to my first church in a little rural town in Kansas, Wamego, Kansas, I'm driving through the town the night before I went to the interview. I'm driving through this little community of 3,500. I'm, calculating the distance from the state capitol, 40 miles away. I'm looking at potential. I'm asking questions about what could be. I'm looking at property. I'm looking at what do we have to work with here. I'm thinking about the possibilities for this congregation of 80 people. Fact of the matter is that even though they want good things for their church's future, the day that a church gets a pastor, the thing they're most excited about is having a pastor. They're most excited about the fact that this journey of interim is over. They're most excited about the fact that they now have someone who is going to, teach them from God's word, who is going to be there to shepherd them as a congregation. They are very happy about, those who are already there are happy about what this means for them. Pastor is looking at what's not there. They are looking more at what is there. And like any relationship, we start out a relationship, even a dating relationship, we start out, and you guys know this, the first 6 months or so of any relationship's all about what we have in common. We want the same things. We like the same things. The guy that tells me she even likes football, and I just mutter under my breath, no, she doesn't. She doesn't like football. She likes you, or she says, hey, this my new boyfriend, he loves to take me shopping. No, he doesn't. He's doing that because he loves you, not because he loves to take you shopping. So, the fact is that in any relationship, this sense of being what each other wants us to be is what we call the honeymoon phase. And in a personal relationship like that, the first 6 months of a dating relationship is all about what we have in common. But we all know the next 60 years are going to be about how we're different. And that reality or that corner is going to turn for the pastor as well. And so while we go into the moment, maybe saying the right things, the true motivations of the heart, many times between pastor and people, are not in the same direction. Neither are wrong. They're just not quite emphasizing or dominated by the same feeling. And so understanding why people are excited that you became their pastor. They're not against, in most cases, they're not against reaching other people. They're not against seeing the church grow. But first and foremost, they're most happy about the fact that they have a pastor and that you are coming to pastor and to lead them. And pastor, absolutely, we want to see God do greater things. We want to see the community reached. Absolutely, these things matter, but we need to have an awareness that our people really desire that we lead them. Certainly, that we establish that with them before we go chasing after the rest of the community. And so, ideas like that, understanding that we may not have wanted the same things. You can see some of the other things that come in the early part of the book. Another list here. Some of the other parts of this. Uh, how pastor treats the past. This third one here that's marked in red. No matter where you think we are, getting here hasn't been easy. How does that new pastor speak of their history? Does that new pastor come across as though, nothing good ever happened here till I got here? Or everything that's behind you, we're going to try to overcome that? Or, how does pastor care about this? I will never forget being in upstate New York doing an Acts 2 journey. And again, had, I think, 11 or 12 churches in that particular group. I believe it was 2011 or 2012, it was early days of the Acts 2 journey. And I'm doing the first weekend. We called it a discovery weekend back then, but it's a lot of retreat one content. I'm doing the life cycle. I'm doing these things that we're familiar with in the Acts 2 journey. And there's a church that's seated at one of the back tables to my right over here. And I'm looking back there, and there's a deacon back there. I don't know if I can do this on the Zoom call, but he's got his arms crossed like this. He's staring at me, and throughout the entire, probably first hour and a half of the meeting, he's doing this. Now, I don't care how confident you are as a speaker. When you got somebody sitting there like this, doing this, it kind of shakes you up a little bit. It's kind of, you're wondering, what on earth's going on with this guy? What have I said that if, I didn't know what was going on. Got all the way to the lunchtime. And in those days, we weren't quite done with the life cycle yet at the lunchtime. But I got all the way to the lunchtime, and I just thought, you know what? I got to go. I got to go figure this out. So I went back, and I, went back to that table while everybody's grabbing lunch, and I came up to this guy, and shook his hand, said, "Hey, good, great to have you here. How's it going?" And it seems like something's not sitting right with you. Talk to me about that. And he looked at me and he said, "It's not what you're saying that's wrong." He said, "But there's no way our church is ever going to go forward until we start dealing with some stuff that's behind us." There was some past that he was carrying, and there's some hurts, and I don't know all the details of it. He said, "This new pastor, he's great, he's fine, but until we're honest about the past, we can't possibly embrace the future." And in that moment, I watched this pastor come over and in an excellent way engage this deacon and just, well, let's talk about that. Bob, let's talk about that. And when they sat down together and Bob's in tears, talking about folks that, anyway, pastor engaged that past as though it was something he wanted to help. He wanted to help heal. He engaged it. He didn't diminish it. He didn't say, yeah, you know what, that's over. Let's move forward. Because sometimes a new pastor can come across that way. Sometimes a new pastor doesn't show a lot of interest in the history of the church. So, people want to know that a pastor understands where they've been and respects that and helps them even the bad, that they learn how they can move forward from that, respecting that. When I walked into the church in Wichita, there were 12 8 by 10 photos of my 12 predecessors in Walmart frames. They were lined up down the hallway of the church. That's what greeted me. Everyone, not one of those guys was smiling. And given the history of the church, I had a sense of why that was. And I mean, I looked at those guys; they were intimidating. Uh, Actually, a month in, I took the pictures down. I scanned all those photos, and I created a more of a singular collage of them to respect the history. But it was just too frightening, and the Walmart frames were, they just wasn't very attractive. But anyway, I realized that there were stories there before I got there. That every one of those guys had wanted to see the day that we were chasing and trying to reach. And so, how you handle the past is a big part of whether or not folks are going to let you lead them into the future. Another element here is, and this is kind of, we hope you'll walk in our old shoes a bit before thinking we can run in your new ones. This, of course, is going to speak to slowing down a little bit and engaging the people where they truly are and understanding why they are where they are and why your predecessor was doing the things your predecessor was doing before you decide all of that was in error or all of that needs to change immediately. Respecting your predecessor, one of the things we talk about in the book is critical because the people who loved your predecessor will end up loving you if you will respect the predecessor. The people that didn't like your predecessor will end up not liking you for whatever reason they come up with. You can pretty well count on it. So you might as well treat your predecessor well so that ultimately the right people like you, the ones that you can work with and that you can love. And so we talk about this, of course, about pastor committing to be there and respecting both the front end and the back end of or the bookends of their own journey in the church. So we talk about that. You can see some of the other things here. Talk about related to pace. Here's one. We're more likely to act our way into new thinking than think our way into new actions. Here I talked to the pastor or the reader of this book about the reality that we tend to behave our way into new thinking rather than think our way into new behaviors. That people need some direction as to the things they need to be doing, and as you do them, if we're more friendly, I may need to teach my people how to be more friendly. I certainly need to model it. Talk about that in a minute. But I definitely want to give my people a sense of how we do this, not just simply motivate them Sunday after Sunday with thou shalt, thou shalt, thou shalt, and try to change their thinking, what they ought to be doing. I just need to show them how to do it. People will behave their way into new thinking much more quicker. The fact of the matter is that values in a group of people only change about every generation, every 20 years. So if you're going to change values in a church, you're going to have to behave your way into those new values. You're going to have to identify the behaviors we want to adopt rather than simply think you're going to change thinking, because thinking is much slower to change and usually requires us to behave our way that way. This is an area I did my doctoral work in, was on changing values in a congregation and how giving people specific things to do ultimately more quickly changed how they think than simply trying to change their thinking itself.
Mhm.
Um, here's another one. This one really jumps out at me. It jumped out at me. I saw this so much. Unfair expectations work both ways. We have got boatloads of articles that have been written about the unfair expectations that are placed upon pastors. And absolutely, they're true. Absolutely, the things people expect of their pastor are unrealistic and they're overwhelming and they can be extremely unhealthy in a church. However, the flip side's also true. Many times, pastors place unfair expectations on their people. And so, it works both ways. And when I recognize that as a leader, that I can do the same thing. That here's a guy that's working, a 45-hour work week. He's handling overtime. He's trying to manage a family. He's got all that responsibility. He's also trying to coach one of the kids' ball teams. He's got all this going on. And I'm frustrated that he won't give 10 to 12 hours of volunteer work to the church. I'm putting unrealistic expectations on him. So yeah, we kind of do that too. And the more that I can recognize, another one of these that I won't talk about today specifically, but kind of says something a little bit similar is that, Pastor, realize you're the one that does this full time. Our lives are varied and our full-time work is aimed in different directions. And so while people want to be involved and they want to help and they want to contribute, many times, we put unrealistic expectations on them, especially those times when we've got somebody in the church that's trying to hold down two or three different assignments in ministry, and we keep adding more and more to their plate. So people want to understand that. This one relates to some of you heard me talk about the use the illustration of Moses leading the children of Israel across the wilderness when we're talking about change. Let me just share it with you real fast for the sake of bringing others up to speed. But I was sitting in staff meeting one Sunday when I was pastoring in Wichita, and I just preached on Sunday about Moses and the people of it. Preached something from the journey across the wilderness. And my youth pastor of all people pipes up during staff meeting and he says, Pastor, you were talking about how many people there were. He said, I did some math. And he talked about this, and we chuckled at the thought of him doing math. And he said, but if you took, as Pastor, you said, there was probably 1.5 to 2 million people that Moses is leading. And many Bible scholars, differ on that, but estimates. I mean, it's a large number of people, no doubt about it. He said, well, if there was a million and a half people, he said, do you realize that if you lined them up 10 abreast and marched them 21 inches apart, like the British apparently did during the Revolutionary War, if you organized them like that, do you realize that many people, that line would stretch from where it started, 70 to 90 miles in length. That's how many people that is. And when you see these things, these marches on Washington D.C., and you talk about the thousands and tens, hundreds of thousands of people that are up there in such demonstrations, you see this mass of people. He said, if you line them up like that, that's how many people there. And obviously they weren't that organized, but 70 to 90 miles. So when I share this in an Acts 2 journey, I'll ask the question, how many miles a day can you do if you're carrying all your stuff? How many miles a day could you do in a desert carrying all your stuff? And the illustration plays out. I'll try to, help people. If they could do 10 miles a day, that means there's a week. There's 7 to 9 days between the guy at the front of the line and the guy at the back of the line because they're scattered everywhere. I mean, you can just imagine this swarm of people moving across the wilderness. And so I talk in that illustration about the different feeling you have depending on where you're at in that line. If you're near the front, you're on the cutting edge. You get to see Moses every day. The leaders are up there. People are probably singing, and every day you wake up thinking that promised land might be over the next sand dune. But if you're halfway back, whole different journey. Halfway back, every day you get up and you're walking through what the other people lived the day before. You don't see Moses very often. You get your information passed through the line. You don't always know what's going on, have a sense of that, and maybe just not as excited because the journey's not as much fun. Go to the back of the line. Who's back there? Well, that's the people that might be a little more attached to where we've been than where we're going. And all the way back there, you never see Moses. Probably you're back there because you've got more to carry. Maybe, you just don't move as quick as you used to into the future. Maybe you're not sure there's a place for you where we're headed. The experience of change differs based on where you're at in the line. Well, what I'm saying here in this particular idea is, Pastor, you got to recognize you're going to have to be available to the whole line, not just those that are with you at the front, not just those that are excited every time you say, let's go this direction or let's go that direction. But you've got to make yourself available to every individual because you want all of them to get there. When you get to the promised land, you're going to need them all for the battles that are ahead. And so, talking a little bit about, how do we treat those people that don't just immediately jump when we say, let's go? How do we treat them if they grumble a bit or sound like they don't want to go at all? The truth of the matter is everybody wants to go. They just have different levels of desire to make the effort necessary to find that future. And so we talk about that. Just a couple more here. Most of us are going to be here for the long haul, and we really want this relationship with you to last. Pastors need to understand that. In fact, the people actually want this relationship to last longer. They wanted this to even outlast when you run out of your best sermons. They still want you to stay. They want you to be there. And so, that desire is in their heart. These people that may be hesitant toward periods of change, they're not resisting you because they want you gone. They want you there, but they want your relationship to be stronger. They want your relationship to be greater in your mind than your destination. Okay. So a lot of churches are in trouble today. Uh, Austin mentioned I do the stats work for the Assemblies of God. Denominational groups report pretty much across the board. There's about an 80%, 75, 80% plateau and decline rate in most denominational, most church organizations. I'm the one that reports that for us. And yeah, we sit in that about 3 out of 4 churches. We've seen things get a little stronger lately, and that's good news, but still over 70% of churches are categorically plateaued or in decline in our fellowship as well. So something's got to change. And that's why I wrote this book, and that's why, this journey matters, is because we've got to figure out ways to change it. I'm going to be honest. A lot of my encounters with some pastors, particularly in certain high risk settings for closure, I do run into some pastors who don't have a lot of developed relational or emotional intelligence. They sometimes say things or get angry in ways at people that are counterproductive to what they're trying to do. I, I'm consulting directly with a couple guys right now, and both, in our conversations, their wives are a part of the conversation, and we both end up saying, "Yeah, but you can't act that way. You can't do that. You can't make that. You can't approach somebody like that." And so, the fact is that there's some things that as pastors we want to make sure we know. We want to equip ourselves so that we can be effective in leading change. Because like you, I mean, we're in this work. I mean, Austin's full time, leading this thing, and it's all about daydreaming of the day when, great pastors and great people can find a way to work together. That's really what the Acts 2 journey, that's where the greatest successes are, is when pastor and team are able to work together effectively. And so that's a quick overview. Maybe it wasn't quick. I don't know, but I was trying to be quick. Overview of the idea behind the book. Like I said, there are 37 different statements that are broken down in the book. Try to write it in a way that's not hard to read, and so hopefully achieve that on some level. But I don't know if you have thoughts, questions, anything. I'll start sharing this so that we can all see each other better. Um, but that's basically what's there. And Austin, I'll let you maybe give direction to additional conversation here.
Thanks, Mike. Any questions, you can feel free to unmute, or you can drop a question that you might have in the chat. So, um, any questions, any comments for Mike?
I will say, while you're thinking about that, I will say, and those of you that have been doing this for a while, helping churches and pastors navigate a is really what church revitalization, church development, church health is all about. That what you how you help them navigate what it takes to achieve change, not just where to go, but how to get there without killing each other, is a huge part of what the kind of work of what we do. It really is the full task. So navigating this is very important.
I have a question, Mike. A
Hey,
lot
John.
of times when we deal with pastors, they've kind of insulated themselves with people that just say what they want them to hear. And so a book like this kind of shows them, maybe allows them to listen to other voices. And I think that's kind of a challenge. And maybe you want to speak to that because getting pastors to listen to other voices when they dismiss those voices so quickly.
Yeah, well, you're right, John. And it's great to see you, John. Congratulations on the new assignment. Glad for what you're doing. That's really cool. Um, yeah, we kind of have a tendency to do. There's a style of leadership that doesn't allow for genuine input. And I'm a Midwest kid, and so this style of leadership is harder for me to understand because really in the Midwest, basically you roll up your sleeves, you go into that room, you figure out what you need to figure out, and who cares who came up with the idea? It doesn't matter if the janitor's the one that said something and that made the most sense. You're happy with that. There are parts of the country and certain styles of leadership where sometimes honor comes before honesty, and a leader, like you said, can simply gather people around themselves, and that leader is going to end up with a lot of bruises along the way because leading change when you're not listening. We do talk in the book a couple of these accounts on the importance of listening to the people, and I I also I'm trying to remember if I covered this in this particular book or not, but when I talk about a healthy ministry, I talk about your ministry blood pressure. I'm not a medical person, so I'll get this wrong, I think probably, but blood pressure I know is one measure over another. Exactly. I think one is the speed at which blood's moving through. And anyway, you may know what they are, but there is a blood pressure measure for your healthy ministry as well, and that's your influence over your accountability. Influence are all those people that heed my voice by whatever path they receive it, whether they hear my podcast, show up on Sunday, do whatever my influence is, people that are listening. But accountability are those people that I feel connected to, those people who directly can speak into my life. And what happens in a lot of ministries is as a ministry grows, influence really grows. That top number really keeps growing and growing and growing, and this number doesn't grow with it. And so as a leader, I have to grow my accountability. I have to increase my sense of who I'm responsible to. Who is it that can speak into my life? Who matters enough to get my attention? And in some settings, when I've talked on this, I talk about three groups of people in the church that will keep your accountability healthy. Children, if you don't shake hands down on one knee, you're going to be unhealthy. Children, you have to feel that accountability to them. Teenagers, just because you hired a youth pastor doesn't mean that you're not their pastor, and you've got to grow that connection. And then the third group I always identify is, for lack of a better term, the people we call the goofy people. those people that are just a little bit unusual or maybe a lot, those people that, as a church, we accumulate a lot of such folks. Jesus gives us those friends because that teaches us how to love like he loved. But if you're doing a good job with those three, you're going to be doing a better job with listening to everybody. If you're dismissing the people that don't necessarily add to you or your journey, then you're likely dismissing a lot of other folks whose voices you need to be hearing as well. And so, as a leader, I have to be responsible for growing that bottom number, especially as the top number grows. But I don't want to cut off any group of people. Yes, I may not have time to meet with as many people as I once did, or as high a percent of my church, I should say, as I once did, because congregations have grown. However, what you're talking about, John, is absolutely critical. Is I've got to feel the accountability to every individual, and I need to be accessible to individuals. This business today, as an organization grows, you only spend time with your leaders. That is a secular leadership concept that you really see very little evidence of. You do see Jesus spending time certainly with his disciples, but when did he abandon the crowd? When was he not available to the individual? When did he not, he's still ministering to the demon possessed, in the last couple of weeks of his earthly life. There's no point at which his ministry became too big in order for him to reach any individual and go out of his way for them. And so, yeah, ministry is different than the secular model. Sorry, long answer to excellent observation on your part, John.
Hey, Mike, how in the world are you? Good to see you.
Hey, Brian. How you doing, man?
Been well. It's been a long time.
Yeah.
One of the things I think that I just wonder if the book entails some of this stuff is the aspect of the minister being physically healthy, emotionally healthy. Being in the ministry for a long time, you get a lot of scars, you get a lot of different things you go through, and then when you try to lead change, just as well the congregation carries the baggage, so can the minister carry the baggage as well. So, does the book address anything to the aspect for the minister to be able to sometimes deal with the emotional aspect, whether it be physical, spiritual, or emotional, or past scars, something like
Yeah.
that?
There,
Because
it, yeah,
relationship
the book.
is
Yeah.
built.
Yeah. Yeah, the book does. We do make reference to, being careful not to see people through the lenses of the last guy at your last church that they remind you of, or their behavior, realizing, yeah, we're carrying wounds. And sometimes, any voice of question can cause us to drift back into something we ran into in our last church, and maybe bring that unresolved emotion into that moment. Things of that nature. That's very tempting because we're not, most of us, depending on how many churches we pastored, this isn't our first change journey either. We've got our hurts and our disappointments from the past, and so it's very easy to unfortunately bring those wounds into this new ministry opportunity. And so we do address it a little bit in the book because you're absolutely right. It's very critical. I address it more in more conversations that specifically focused on healthy ministry. Staying healthy in ministry. That's holding things loosely, being careful how long you carry something, all those things that we teach our people about forgiveness and all that. We've we got to apply those things as well in many relationships. But yeah, you're absolutely right. And, unfortunately, past hurts can continue to derail a pastor's efforts in the future, even in new settings, if they're not effectively dealing with the hurts along the way. Most pastors jump from one bad situation into another because they've got it. They need work. They need to be, they can't as a family be unemployed and they may not be taking time for the healing. So they've really got to be intentional at getting the help they need to overcome some of those things. Very good point. Great to see you. Brian was in my
It was
Sunday
good to
school
see.
class like 100 years ago, Brian. That was cool. Way back in the
I'm
day.
not 100. I'm not that old. And if I am,
Well, it was the last millennium, Brian. So great to see you. Anyone else something on your mind relative to this?
Hey, Mike, that
I just like
point
to,
about, oh, go ahead.
oh, no, go ahead.
Can you go ahead?
I was just going to ask, my style of leadership is more actually a leader style than the former pastor who was an older pastor. This is a rural town that we're in, northwest of Fort Worth.
Mhm.
And the pastor had some health difficulties, that kind of thing. And I won't go into the whole history, but his style of leadership was just mainly he preached. And then his wife was kind of the administrator type.
Mhm.
And he was good at pastoral care, which I count as a plus in my ministry. That's something I thrive in is pastoral care. But I'm also directly involved in all the ministries and seeing not micromanaging, but having a hand in that. So it's been a different. I'm approaching 5 years as the lead pastor, and it's taken that long to really switch the style of leadership. And we've got involved in more outreach and that kind of thing. So how do you how do you I'm ready to take the next steps and without getting off of the subject matter which you've presented with your book. Since my the third Sunday in um, is when COVID hit. I my first Sunday was March the 1st of 2020. So you can imagine what that was just walking in. All of a sudden, we were down for 7 weeks, and
Yeah.
anyway, all that. So I've had a lot to deal with since we've been here. But are you seeing us coming out of COVID and also the style of leadership that we're doing? Do you see that getting people to think outward rather than just inward is a positive thing?
Well, great, Ken. Wow, yeah, you stepped in a obviously challenging moment. But you said something along the way that several things, but one thing in particular is extremely important. You used the term five, or you mentioned 5 years. You've been there 5 years. Typically, in most past, if the previous situation is reasonably healthy, then it takes about 5 years I mean, you jumped on the train 5 years ago, but it really takes about 5 years before the people really are letting you drive, are letting you, really conduct that train. And, that nobody wants to hear that in the first 5 years, because we want to get rolling. I didn't want to hear it. I had a pastor friend actually say it to me when I went to Wichita, ran into him at a shopping mall. He's a wise pastor. He had the strongest church in the city. He said, "Yeah, you realize you won't be pastor in that church until you've been there 5 years." And I didn't want to hear that. I'd only been there about 5 weeks at that point. I wanted to be pastoring much sooner than that, but it takes that time. And I think COVID slowed that a bit in a lot of settings as well, makes that even maybe a tad longer because a lot of our direct interaction with people was limited for a while. And so, a lot of those factors. But now that you are in that 5 year, you've been there and you've established relationship. People know who they are. They may still be noticing that you're different than the last guy. That's okay. You're different style of leadership, but they definitely, I would think they're in most cases with most folks in your church, they're ready to follow you as a leader. And so outward focus is always the catalyst that drives the health of the church. Getting the church to focus beyond its walls is the key factor in helping that church get healthy. It produces vision in their hearts. It does everything. And so, yeah, leading them forward. Um, you know, that's that's the ticket. Of course, the Acts 2 journey starts with vision. I mean, outward focus drives everything. Inward focus is what causes a congregation to plateau and to decline. Lost vision causes plateau, which leads to inward focus, causes decline. Outward focus is the catalyst for potential to lead them forward. And so, yeah, you're definitely in that place, arriving in that moment where I always used to jokingly tell people, and you've heard others say it as well, I'm sure, is that for the first 5 years you can blame your predecessor for about anything, but after that it's yours. You're, it's that it really has begun to make that shift. And so, if they've come out of a really deep hurt, some people may even be a little bit slower It may take even a little more than 5 years, might take six, but in most cases, a reasonably healthy situation in transition. And the truth is, all of us are going to be different than our predecessor. Hopefully so.
Yes.
That's, God raises up, if God raises up people for this moment, for this time to lead the church and lead his church. And so we're always going to be demonstrating different gifts than those that have stood in that place before us. And that's the way God does stuff. So
That's the
uh,
reason we're thankful for the Acts 2 journey. I think we're primed for it.
good, good. That's excellent. Yeah. Anything else? Austin, you were going to mention something?
Yeah. Um, Actually, my question was, I appreciated that influence over accountability kind of measurement. I was wondering if there is kind of a time frame, but you addressed that in the last question. If there's a time frame that a pastor can expect for um, the people to maybe get on board. You mentioned that it takes longer than you might think, and it's a slower process than you might think. But it sounds like that 5 year mark is maybe a good one to have in mind.
Mhm. Yeah, and I forget who said this to me. I was very blessed to have a dad who was a remarkable leader. He wasn't a pastor. He was a 35-year church secretary, treasurer, deacon guy, a business leader, and in fact, it may have been him. He might have been the one that said to me, when you first come to a church, like anything, the individuals who didn't connect with the previous leader will be the first to act like they connect with you. They will, they'll step up, and maybe it's good and it's going to be good. But he said, be careful. You know, the people who supported the previous leader may be the slowest to to acclimate and support you, but those are the ones you need. Those are the individuals that are the strength of the church. And, I saw that play out in Wichita. Some of the folks that were the quickest to, oh, I'm so glad you're here, and they didn't have anything good to say about my predecessor, but, oh, finally we got a good pastor. Those were not the people that the church could really count on and that we could build on. Because ultimately they find additional reasons not to like you. And, that's where we all know transfer growth runs that same risk, that a lot of folks that bounce from church to church keep bouncing in the end. But, it doesn't mean we distrust them. It's just we're a little more cautious. And we realize it takes time for the influence that you need to really grow. And, that's what I love about people that love my predecessor. I know in time, if I treat them well, um, they're going to give me that same kind of support. And they did, and they do. And so that's, um, what really the book, I think, just kind of the thing I'd maybe say in summary of the book is really trying to shape how a new pastor sees his congregation. If you believe the best about people, then, if you lead with them instead of trying to lead around them, if you don't see I inherited a guy that had been more than 25 years, had been the church treasurer. And frankly, the church without the quality of what he did for many, many years. And that church would have been off, would have closed many years before. And it took me a little time to build that relationship with him. But boy, was it worth it. He became one of my strongest supporters, still to this day, one of my greatest friends. And a lot of the good things God was able to do in the church in our time there happened because of his influence and his leadership. And I figured out how to lead alongside him rather than to oppose him. And I can guarantee if had opposed him, uh, things could not have been accomplished the way they were. And so, learning how to believe the best about people and just deciding that, you know, this is where God's put me, and these are the people He's given me, and if I run all them off, try to get new people to replace them, I may not be a strong enough leader to survive that. Most aren't. I need to learn how to lead those that God's given me, and so that's really the heart behind the book. And it is a pastor-friendly book in that regard. It's not one that offends the pastor in any way, but it is one that helps him understand his people, hopefully a little bit more effectively. So.
running up here against our hour, so we'll go ahead and uh, draw this to a close here. Mike, would you pray for those on the call today, those who are leading pastors, those who are pastors themselves, who are at various stages of leading the change process? But would you just yeah, offer a word of prayer for us as we
Absolutely.
depart?
Glad to. Yeah. Lord Jesus, thank you so much for the joy of being called according to your purpose. You've placed each of us in different slots in your harvest field in this moment and given us different responsibilities, perhaps. Some are in district work and network leadership and are trying to guide pastors and aid them in being more effective in their congregations. Others are on the front lines working with church in churches and Lord, they're serving you in that local congregation. God, wherever we find ourselves, I just pray, Lord, that you would continue to make your spirit available to us, that you would guide us and lead us. Lord, thank you for the people that you've surrounded us with. Thank you for the individuals that have been faithful in our congregations. These friends that have been determined, that maybe have endured quite a bit. Maybe they've got some of their own battle scars that from situations that were difficult for the congregation, but they've stayed and they've been faithful. God, I pray your blessing in their life as we lead them. Lord, ultimately, at the end of the day, we want what you want. We want your purpose to be fulfilled in our communities. God, we want to be the church that you have intended us to be. And so, God, I pray you'd help us in that regard and help us as we help other leaders, Lord, to navigate that same journey in their communities. We love you, Jesus. Amen.
And thanks, Mike. Thanks everybody for joining us, and we'll keep you posted on our next conversation. Certainly grateful for this one. We'll have it posted, and we'll send it out to those who are registered for the call as well. So thanks. Have a great remainder of your Monday.
Thanks so much. Appreciate it. Thanks, Mike.
Thanks,
Enjoyed
guys.
the time.